The storm that slammed into Gannett's Reach the first week of November seemed determined to unbutton the sky. Roof slates flew like playing cards. Gulls disappeared inland with unnerving silence. And the North Sea reared as if it meant to climb the basalt cliffs and drag the whole village back with it. When the gale finally staggered off toward Norway, the townsfolk emerged to tally what was missing. 2 chimneys, a dozen lobster creels, one tabby cat that everyone hoped had taken sensible refuge, and though few remarked on it, yet another layer of the headland had been pared away. Ewan McCrae, keeper of the Farness Light, noticed more than most. Every storm left geological fingerprints, a new fracture line, a sheared-off boulder, salty detritus in unlikely places, but twice now, after storms coinciding with spring tides, the receding water revealed something odder than mere erosion. For 3 or 4 precious hours, seasonal parting of the seaweed curtain and the returning tide, the cliff base displayed filigreed inscriptions, lines of delicate carving as crisp as if etched by a jeweler's burin rather than by blind water. The words were always different, always poetic, and always gone by the next morning when waves filled the wounds with silt and barnacles. The first time, Ewan had put the phenomenon down to pareidolia and wishful thinking. He was 63, long widowed, and spent his evenings collecting metaphors to keep loneliness at bay. It was entirely possible, he told himself, that he merely wanted the cliff to speak, yet his notebook now contained 2 verbatim stanzas he could not have imagined, for they bore puns in a dialect of Gaelic he had not heard since childhood. Ye who kindle wayfair fires, trace the dark with filament light, when nightfold sea forgets its choirs, guard the hinge between wrong and right. If those lines were a hallucination, they were a persuasive one. On the morning after November's gale, Ewan put on his oilskins, climbed the lighthouse's spiral stair, and doused the lamp. From the balcony, he scanned the tide line. Sure enough, where the cliff's foot curved like a whale's jaw, pale grooves glimmered, calligraphy 2 meters high. He glanced at his watch. Low tide began at 6:47. By 7:30, seawater would lap the letters clean. That gave him less than 2 hours. He never went down alone anymore, not after last winter when a rogue wave had toppled him and cracked 2 ribs. But the yearning to read those lines again flared so hot it eclipsed caution. He made a compromise. He would stay on the scary flats, not venture beneath overhangs. He packed his field glasses, a graphite stick, and a coil of butcher paper, hoping to take an impression. Halfway to the cliff he saw her. The woman stood ankle-deep in the tide pool, black hair bundled under a wool cap, coat the peculiar green of old copper. She held a folding stool under one arm and a long bamboo brush in the other, as though she meant to paint directly on the air. A lacquered box lay open on a rock beside her, its compartments crowded with cakes of ink. Ewan stopped a dozen yards away. "Morning!" he shouted over the chop. She turned, and her face cracked into an unabashed grin. "You must be the keeper," she called back, accent lilting, neither local nor quite foreign. "That's me. I hoped I'd meet you." She lifted the brush in greeting, then pointed at the inscriptions. "You've been reading them longer than anyone, I'm told. So you've heard the village gossip." "I've been following it up the coast." She stepped closer, boots popping and suctioned sand. "Malin, traveling calligrapher." Ewan raised an eyebrow. "Is that an occupation or a confession?" "Both." She shook his hand, palm cold and ink smudged. "Words that vanish interest me. War zone pamphlets, skywriting, water prayer in Japanese festivals. A pub in Banff said storms here write poetry on stone. I needed to see." And she turned to the cliff face the way a priestess might turn to an oracle. "It's better than rumor. Look at those strokes. Upcut, downcut, variable depth like pressure shifts. They aren't random cracks." "Seawater and luck," Ewan insisted, but softly. "Seawater has impeccable penmanship, then." He found himself chuckling. Against reason, he felt relieved that someone else saw what he saw. Relief quickly became urgency. The tide was already creeping back. We should record what we can. May snapped open her sketchbook. I'll start from the left, you take the right. Work erased conversation for 40 minutes. Ewan traced lines onto paper strips he taped end to end. May reproduced whole passages at gesture speed, her brush releasing plumes of black across ivory pages. Spray kissed their cheeks. A cormorant flapped by like an exclamation point. The poem was longer than the previous ones, 6 stanzas, vertiginous in imagery, shifting between rhyme schemes like someone changing gears. Threads of Old Norse curled through Scots English. A single line erupted in classical Chinese that May translated on the spot. Ink is the water that remembers. Before the last verse surrendered to froth, Ewan managed to capture. When beacon hearts grow shutter thin, and no tongue finds the sailor, let stone be skin, let wind be ink, and carve the unsent prayer. The sea closed over the final word with a hissful stop, delivered by the planet. They retreated to higher ground, breathing steam. On the lighthouse walkway, thermos cups of tea in hand, May peered at the lamp tower with an artisan's squint. How long have you lived with that light? 38 years, Ewan said. My father kept it before me. My wife helped until... He cleared his throat. Until the sea had other ideas. I'm sorry. He nodded acknowledgement. The cliff poems started appearing the year after she drowned. I assumed I was going mad from grief, but they came back, and some lines felt pointed. May unpacked her brush kit, letting the afternoon sun glint off brass hinges. I think the poems respond to listeners. Storm, cliff, consciousness. Each completes the circuit. She smiled. Which is why I chased rumors up here. I want to write with them. Write with a storm? Co-author, maybe. She tapped a brush against the parapet. Ink can answer water. If we can predict when the next poem emerges, we might add our own stanza, something the sea has to reply to. Ewan considered the absurdity, then the beauty. Spring tides and equinoctial gales line up in 13 days. If a low late-night tide meets a Sioux Easter, conditions match the last 2 events. Then we prepare, May said, eyes shining the way Moira's had when she tuned her fiddle. Against his will, Ewan felt a thread tighten between old grief and new possibility. For the next fortnight, they became conspirators. By day, they repaired roof leaks and serviced the Fresnel lens. By night, they spread photographs and geological charts across the keeper's table. May introduced Ewan to ink chemistry, iron gall, lampblack, indigo distilled from woad that smelt faintly of peat smoke. In return, he taught her flare code and the rhythms of maritime weather bulletins. Despite the age gap, they realized with surprise, both had spent most of their adult lives chasing impermanent text. He with lighthouse flashes that spelled safety, she with brush strokes that evaporated like breath on glass. The village treated them with tolerant curiosity. Children peeked into May's rented shed to watch sumi clouds bloom on parchment. Pub regulars kidded Ewan about finally courting. He answered with a grunt and an embarrassed grin. Inside, something long dormant stretched awake. The awaited storm arrived precisely wrong. 2 days early, without warning, blowing from the northeast instead of the south. At 2:10, Ewan's anemometer shrieked. By 2:30, the light's glass was stung by horizontal rain. May ran up the spiral stair, still buttoning her coat. Too rough, Ewan called above the howl. But the tide's low now. Not low enough. You'd be pinned to the cliff. She looked like a drop marionette when she realized he was right. We'll lose the poem. We'll read the next one, he assured, though his own disappointment tasted like rust. They remained on watch, charting gusts, noting barometric freefall. At 3:15, the gale performed a trick. The wind veered a full quadrant, pressure plateaued, and an eerie hush replaced the roar. May glanced at him. Eye of the storm. Ewan's pulse hammered, and the tide still retreating. He grabbed 2 headlamps and threw open the door. 5 minutes, no heroics. They scrambled down the zigzag path, boots skating on sleet-slick stone. The sea lay back, muttering but subdued. Below, the overhang lamplight caught new grooves, gleaming wet. May exhaled a single syllable of wonder. The carving this time was enormous, a whole escarpment transformed into a page. Jagged lines were edged so clean they could have sliced parchment. Yet something was different. Spaces gaped where half phrases should be, as though the poem waited for ink to fill blanks. May ran gloved fingers along one gap. "This," she whispered, "is an invitation." She extracted a roll of water-soluble charcoal bound with seaweed extract, one of her disappearing inks. Kneeling, she painted a sequence of characters Ewan didn't recognize. The marks glimmered like nacre when wetted by drizzle. "What do they say?" he asked. "Your lighthouse flashes speak to sailors. These flashes speak to storms." She laid the brush down. "I wrote, 'We are listening. What do you remember?'" A rumble overhead answered, distant yet deliberate. Ewan thought he felt the rock vibrate, though it could have been blood thudding in his ears. May stepped back beside him. For a breath, they stood as deponents at the edge of cosmic testimony. Nothing else happened. The hush lifted, wind resumed, first gentle, then savage. "Time to retreat," Ewan said. They zigzagged up the path amid sleet bullets. By dawn, the gale had marched east. Breakfast silence glowed with unsaid questions. At 9, village kids hammered on the lighthouse door. "The cliffs, Mr. McRae. Miss May, you better come see." They all but dragged him across the headland. The tide was falling again, neaps this time, giving them longer access. And what access the poem had grown overnight, filling May's blanks with fresh chiseling, so new the stone edges gleamed like fresh steeled knives. "We are the breath before the word before the wave. Where ink entreats what wind has heard, remember, we are brave." May touched the carved reply with trembling fingers. It answered. Ewan read the next stanza and the next, until his throat closed around a personal reference no stranger could know. "Moira of the kelp brown hair waits where lantern dreams begin. Keep her, do not lose her there, turn the light within." He tasted metal, realized he'd bitten his lip. May saw the change. "Ewan, my wife's name." He leaned one hand on rock for balance. "No one else alive knows what I called that shade of hair." Could May's inquiry have triggered a sentient response? Could grief stamp itself onto wind? Even he, schooled in mariner's superstition, reeled at the possibility. Over the next week, Cliff and calligrapher conversed like old pen pals. May would leave a single line, sometimes Scots haiku, sometimes pictogrammatic riddles. After each nocturnal tide, the storm-written poem elongated, threading Gaelic images with Chinese brush logic. The villagers began to gather for daily readings, bringing flasks and scones. Headlines from Aberdeen dubbed the place the Singing Scar. With revelation came risk. Word spread to academics and media outlets. A regional TV crew requested exclusive footage. One entrepreneur proposed laser scanning the entire headland and charging admission. Ewan balked. The poems he felt were partly an elegy to human quiet. Tour buses would kill that, May agreed. They drafted a polite refusal and posted it at the harbor. The storm series paused, letting winter intensify in the usual ways. Hoarfrost on gorse, pink dusk at 4 p.m., whiskey steam in pub windows. May extended her lodging month to month, calling herself seasonal ink supply. Ewan discovered he liked speaking aloud at dinner again. On the winter solstice, the barometer tanked worse than any time that decade. The maritime forecast spoke of 12-meter waves, hurricane force gusts. Ewan lit the lamp early, every Fresnel facet blazing like an angry sun. May brought her inks up the tower. "Too dangerous to go out after," he warned. "I won't," she promised, sitting cross-legged by the watch desk. She began grinding ink, preparing, as if rehearsal mattered even if performance was unlikely. The storm struck with a shriek that made lantern panes quiver. The tower leaned perceptibly. Yet a strange clarity permeated Ewan, the kind he had felt only twice before, on his wedding day and the night his daughter was born. A certainty that something irreversible was speaking through circumstance. "May," he said, "I have to answer the poem." She looked up. "Wind thunder baptized the tower. How?" "Light is my ink." He ran to the signal lever that controlled a pair of auxiliary blinds. Morse code through fog had saved ships before. It could, perhaps, converse with an elemental poet. May caught on and flipped open the International Code Manual, but Ewan waved it aside. Not code, rhythm. He dimmed the lamp half, brightened, dimmed again. A heart's pulse, 3 slow, 3 fast, 3 slow, the living SOS. He repeated it, then paused. May switched off the desk lamp. Darkness deepened the meaning, nothing. Then, horizon wide, a lightning bolt answered, strobing, triple long, triple short, triple long, echo. The sea had mirrored his beat. Ewan felt his knees buckle. May steadied him. "It hears." From the cliff base a roar cleaved the cacophony. Not thunder, not wavestone collapsing, the tower shook. They clung to rail and breath until the onslaught spent itself. At dawn, they ventured out into a world rearranged. The storm had carved a new inlet, swallowing the path they once descended. Boulders lay where footings had been, yet the poem survived, rolled farther up the newly exposed rock, massive and unmistakable. The final stanza, fresh-hewn and dripping, faced the risen sun. Here ends the tally of salt and skin. Begin the tally of breath and kin. Keeper, share the watch you bear. Ink will anchor what light lays bare. May read it aloud, voice hoarse from windburn. Ewan closed his eyes. The stanza didn't resurrect Moira, it didn't stop time, but it altered the dreadful calculus. He could share his vigil, not endure it. When he opened his eyes, May's expression said she understood without needing the private arithmetic. The village rebuilt the cliff path with safer switchbacks, funded by anonymous donations that smelled of lighthouse stipend and calligrapher commissions. Ewan retired from official service the following spring, petitioning that May be named associate caretaker for heritage liaison. The Maritime Agency, baffled but impressed by increased tourism and 0 shipwrecks that season, approved. They instituted a ritual. At each low tide following a storm, lighthouse and ink house, thus. The children called them, would transcribe the poem in tandem. Ewan Flash translated verses by lamp to any freighter within horizon line. May painted companion scrolls hoisted on the visitor's center wall. Nothing was for sale except hot tea and blank postcards visitors could fill with their own impermanent words. Sometimes the cliff offered nothing but blank rock. Sometimes it gave trivial couplets about gull flight. Once, after a perfectly sunny week, it carved a single word, wait. Those silences, Ewan thought, were stanzas too. Years later, scholars still argued whether capillary fissures, freeze-thaw cycles, and selective lichen growth could explain the lithic poems. May and Ewan let them argue. They knew explanation was the price of wonder, but not its replacement. One August dusk, after sealing the lantern for the night, they walked hand in hand along the promenade. The tide was full, hiding the cliff beneath black water. May squeezed his fingers. "Do you ever worry the poems might stop for good?" she asked. "They'll stop when storms run out of breath," he said. "And when that happens, I suspect we'll have bigger concerns." She laughed. Wind snatching the sound. They faced seaward, guardians of beacon and brush, trusting that the next low tide would unveil words worth chasing. And if it didn't, they would write their own. Above the noise of gulls and engines and time, the lighthouse ticked its slow rotation, a metronome for vows neither marriage papers nor geology could fully record. And deep below, under acres of darkening water, an unfinished poem waited for moon, wind, and two patient readers to turn the page once more.